Hello, my dear friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're going to be learning chapter 4 in Rambam in the laws of reciting the Shema. We are today going to be learning the laws in regards who is obligated to recite the Shema, who is exempt at certain time periods of life where, for whatever reason, we might be exempt, certain people, as we're going to see. So the Rambam says that in general, as we all know, that in regards to mitzvot that are bound by a certain time, as we have already explained earlier, women are exempt. They do not have to do these mitzvot. The Torah gives them a special exemption from having to perform this mitzvah if it's connected, bound to a certain time in regards to a positive commandment. For instance, if we're talking about listening to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So technically, if a woman is very busy and she's not able to listen to the shofar, the Torah gives her a special pass to not have to listen to the shofar. Similarly, also over here, in regards to the Shema, since it is bound to a certain time, it has to be in the morning or in the evening. So therefore, a woman would be exempt. Similarly, also, children are exempt. They are children. On the other hand, even though children are exempt, but still we should educate them to recite the Shema and pray. It's a very positive thing. If we have a person who is getting married, so we have the groom and the bride. Now, if it's the first time they're getting married, they're both virgins, so then because they are going to be distracted by the mitzvah of them getting married and all the marital mitzvot that are included, and it's the first time they're doing it, so therefore the Torah says that they are exempt and they do not have to recite the Shema right off for the first couple days of them being married. If it's someone who's getting married for a second time, in other words, he was already married before, or she was already married before, so then now they would not be exempt, and he would have to recite the Shema. And in general, anything which would distract a person from being able to recite the Shema, if it's a very important reason, as we're going to see, so then a person would be exempt from reciting the Shema. So for instance, if a person, God forbid, has a family member who passed away, or if they were watching over a dead body in the time before the person is buried, or similarly someone who is at a funeral. So then, if it's during the time of reciting the Shema, so then the person is exempt. So a person who is mourning is someone passed away in their family, so then they would be exempt from reciting the Shema. Similarly, also someone who is digging the grave diggers. So then as well, similarly, they would also be exempt. Now, in general, it says in Jewish law that we shouldn't make a funeral in the time when the mitzvah of reciting the Shema will come upon us. So, in other words, we should either do it later or before, but we shouldn't schedule it specifically in the time when it's time for prayer. Unless it's a very great person and for whatever reason they have to do it at that time, so then it would be permissible. And during the act, and in such a case, when it is during the time of reciting the Shema, so then individuals should leave and walk away from the casket of the deceased, recite the Shema, and then come back, and so they will flip the people slowly, one by one will go. If they were doing in a eulogy, and similarly, same concept, they're sitting there in front of the deceased, and as we learned that we shouldn't be saying the Shema in front of a dead body, so therefore, again, one by one, they should go and come back, recite the Shema, and then come back. And the person who is, and if they're not doing it in front of the deceased, so they're just doing it in the house of the mourners, and the deceased is elsewhere, so then the people will all recite Shema together, they will all pray, but the actual mourner will be exempt, and he will just sit there because he's not obligated to recite the Shema. Now, if it's after the funeral, so all this was applicable before a funeral. So it's all in between the time when a person passed away until the person is buried. Now, after a funeral, so there is a custom where after the funeral, there is the people that are joining in the funeral make two rows of people, and the mourners will walk in between these two rows of people, and all the people who have come to join in the funeral will give their words of comfort to the mourners. So if it's a time of reciting the Shema at that time, so if they're able to recite even just the first verse of Shema before they're going to stand in line, so then they should do that. But if not, so then they should first give their comfort and then afterwards recite the Shema. And if you have people that are standing more on the outskirts, they're not standing right near the mourners, so then they can recite the Shema. Now, in regards to then when we're saying that someone who is exempt from reciting the Shema, and this is in general, in regards to any mitzvah of someone who is exempt. So for instance, if we're speaking about a woman who is exempt from reciting the Shema, or as we said, any mitzvah that is time bound, if she wants to, or anyone else who is exempt from doing a certain mitzvah, in this case reciting the Shema, is technically able to do that mitzvah. So for instance, if a woman wants to recite Shema, she absolutely is able to do it, and she gets a mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah, she gets reward for it. It's a very special opportunity. Similarly in regards to listening to the shofar. Similarly in regards to shaking the lulav or eating in the sukkah on Sukkot. Any mitzvah which is time-bound, technically, although they would be exempt, in this case, if they want, they can do it, and of course, it's going to be a very positive idea, very positive mitzvah. Now the Rambam says, very interesting, but the Rambam says one little note, that if we see that the person who is distracted over here, as we said, someone who had someone pass away, or if it's a groom who is getting married for the first time, etc., and he says, well, I really want to still say the Shema, but we see that the person is in a very confused state, and they're not, they're not fully in control of themselves because of the situation in which they are in. So therefore, we will say, you are exempt, do not do it, it's better not to do it, it's not correct, it's not proper to recite the Shema in such a state. Anyone who is ritually impure is still obligated to recite the Shema. And this is in regards to various types of purifications. For instance, someone who has touched the carcass of a crawling animal, or someone who has, as we see that there is a very interesting decree which Ezra, the one who built the second temple, says we're going back 2,500 years ago. Ezra came along and said the following idea. He said that a person who has had sexual relations should not pray, and should not be praying, should not recite the Shema. Problem was that it was a very unless they go to the mikvah and they purify themselves afterwards. The problem was that this was a very hard thing for all the people to have to go to get ritually pure every time they have sexual relations. And therefore, this was a decree which was not accepted amongst the masses of the Jewish people. So therefore, the Rambam says that because it was not accepted, so therefore it is something which we do not, on a general level, is not something which we follow, and therefore it is accepted across the board that you are able to recite the Shema, and also, as well as learning Torah, even after a person has had seminal emission, because the words of the Torah cannot be ritually impure. And rather they stay in their purity forever, as it says in the verse in Jeremiah, "Are not my words like fire, declares the Lord." Just as fire is incapable of becoming impure, so too also the words of the Torah are never defiled. So therefore, when we pray or when we study, in whatever case we might be, unless we have to listen to the restrictions as we learned yesterday. It has to be in a clean place, etc. We have to be befitting, we have to be wearing clothing, etc. But in our bodily state, it would be okay, it would not matter. The words of the Torah can never be defiled, and they are always standing in their holiness. So that is the what the Rambam says in regards to this idea, although I will mention that in the Hasidic community and in other communities as well, there is a highlight to go to the mikvah to have a ritual extra sense of purity, and even some go every single day as a before prayer, as a sign of an extra level of purity before praying to God, before starting our day studying, to have this extra level of purity. But the Rambam says that according to the base level of the law, you don't have to, because this was a decree which was not accepted amongst all the Jewish people. But someone who wants to be stringent on themselves and wants to do the extra letter of the law according to what Ezra wants to institute, which was for a positive concept, in other words, that a person who has had sexual relations should have this extra level of purity, so then it is something which is a plus, although it is not a must. So that is the chapter for today, my friends. Chapter 4, learning about who is obligated and who is exempt from reading the Shema. We will see you all tomorrow.